Big story today is coming from West Lafayette. According to multiple media reports, Jeff Brohm leaving Purdue to become the head coach at his alma mater, the University of Louisville. Brohm, who led Purdue to the Big Ten championship game this year for the first time ever, spent 6 years in West Lafayette, turned around a program that went 3-24 in Big Ten play under his predecessor, Darrell Hazell. Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports and The Athletic joining us now. And Bruce, the reports out of Louisville are that there is a board meeting today at 4 o'clock where they will take up the notion of approving the contract for Jeff Brohm. Is it your understanding this is just a formality? Is this a done deal here?
That's my understanding, Dave. This had gotten a lot of traction yesterday morning, and they had to go through kind of the paperwork to get there and maybe the protocol. But as you said, this is his alma mater. This is him going home. He turned down the chance to go there before, but I just think he's left Purdue in a much better shape than when he found it, as you said.
Yeah, Louisville did make overtures to him, as you said, 4 years ago when they eventually made the hire of Scott Satterfield. And it was pretty clear that the job was Brohm's if he wanted it. So why do you think he turned it down 4 years ago and now apparently is going to accept it?
I think a couple things. Right now, Louisville is in a much better place. Certainly, as they've jumped into the NIL space, they have a really highly regarded bunch of commits who are lined up to go there. I think that they've been very aggressive on that space. I also think if you look what he's done at Purdue, I think it's hard for him to leave that early in his tenure. He had some success there, got people excited. But now, he won 17 games the last 2 years. They obviously just won the Big Ten West Championship. I had wondered how much better he could do at Purdue. You look at what he's done. I mean, there's only been one 10-win season in the school's history. He just had led him to a 9-win season. I think the conference is honestly getting a lot harder too. If you look at it, we obviously know what Ohio State has been for a long time. Jim Harbaugh has really got Michigan hot again, back-to-back Big Ten titles. They're rolling. I think you look at what Brett Bielema has done at Illinois, and that's a school that they're really got to be competitive with if you're Purdue. And then you add in two terrific coaches in Luke Fickell at Cincinnati and obviously Matt Rule at Nebraska. I mean, I think it's only that much harder to compete in there, whereas I think if you look at Louisville, Clemson is not where Clemson was 5 years ago, certainly. Miami's still in rebuild mode. Florida State is a little better than, on the right track. But the ACC is there for the taking. And I think for him to go home with the offense he has, with the players we think he can get. I mean, look what he did for a guy like Charlie Jones. He was really a non-factor offensively at Iowa, and he goes to Purdue and has a remarkable season. So I think he can sell that. I think he can sell being home. And I think it's just the right time for him.
So assuming Brohm is in fact gone, where do you think Purdue might turn for his successor?
This will be interesting because I think there's a bunch of solid sitting head coaches. Dino Babers, who has been a Purdue assistant, has done pretty well at Syracuse. That's a tough job. He's somebody he's 61, but he looks like he's 51. I think he's somebody that they will consider. You have guys who are maybe rising sitting head coaches like a Kane Womack, who had done really well as an Indiana assistant, and he's been terrific at South Alabama. I think former Florida coach Dan Mullen may get some consideration. Kevin Sumlin, who was once a really good linebacker at Purdue and has deep ties there, I would not be surprised if he gets consideration. Then I think you look at maybe a guy like Troy Calhoun, who's had a lot of success at Air Force. And then there's some assistants I would keep an eye on. Todd Monken, he's at Georgia, has been a head coach. He grew up only 2.5 hours away from there. I think Brian Hartline at Ohio State, he's very well respected. And maybe even a Jimmy Leonard. I think they have some interesting options. The question is, do they go with an offensive-minded guy, or do they go with somebody who they feel like, okay, he can get people really excited here, and maybe we'll roll the dice on a younger guy, whether it's a Hartline or a Jim Leonard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I certainly am of the belief that Purdue's best off going with an offensive coach, just kind of given their history and the cradle quarterbacks and whatnot. It will be interesting to see the direction they go in, but some really good candidates there. Let's turn our attention to the CFP, obviously the Big Ten with 2 teams in. I know you've spent some time around Michigan over the past couple of years, and I get asked this question quite a bit. I'm curious on your take. How did this happen? How did Michigan go from Jim Harbaugh somewhat on the hot seat? I mean, needing to redo his contract and kind of make it incentive-laden, and certainly there was a group of Michigan fans who I think would have been comfortable with him being let go. How do you go from that to beating Ohio State twice in a row and making the playoff?
Yeah, we did a really deep dive on this because I spent a ton of time around Michigan this year and for The Athletic. And really what we kind of learned was that there was a realization in the program, hey, we are not going to be able to out-personnel Ohio State. The way you beat them is to out-culture them and to out-physical them. And they really dedicated. One of the guys behind the scenes who had a big role was Biff Poggi, who is really Harbaugh's right-hand man. He's going to leave to go to be the head coach at Charlotte, but he had a big role in really helping establish the culture and changing things. Harbaugh listened to him. I think you got to give a lot of credit to the development piece, the strength coach there, Ben Herbert, and what he has done. I think really you look at the ways that they have worked to prove and to really show that they are the most physical program in the Big Ten. When Harbaugh turned Stanford around, Stanford was horrible when he took over that program. He set out to make it the bully of the West, and he accomplished that, and they were a force by the time he left. And I think what he's done is grinded and worked and had that team buy in. And you have a lot of really good leaders and a team that was not satisfied with beating Ohio State once last year. They had a chip on their shoulder that people thought it was a fluke. I mean, I talked to a lot of people there who came away with that feeling. And so I think the way they prepare is really the secret to what has, why they're 19-1 in Big Ten games in the last 2 years. It's amazing. I mean, I was in the shoe that day, and there was, just looking at the faces of the people in the building, there was shock. The only people who believed Michigan was going to do what they did were the people on the Michigan sideline. And I think because of that belief, because of how they've trained it and developed it, it's really been amazing to see. I think it's as impressive as the turnaround job he did at Stanford, because he's basically toppled Ohio State. And what they did was just old fashioned. We are going to be more physical than you. And I think because everybody does all this spread stuff, the physicality nature of it and how we're going to commit to it with 9-on-7 and all this, kind of old school, grinded out football. I think that becomes kind of a wrinkle and a curveball to people now because they just don't do it at other places.
You mentioned Biff Poggi in there. Your article on The Athletic on him was a tremendous read. So if people want a little bit more insight into his role, I wholeheartedly recommend it. Give people in Big Ten country who maybe haven't seen a whole lot of TCU a little bit of a primer on what Michigan is up against.
They're very fast. I mean, they're probably top 22 would be competitive with any other top 10 team. We know that their quarterback, Max Duggan, he's a Heisman finalist. He's an Iowa kid. He's super tough. It's almost like single wing football with him. He loves to run it. That's where he's comfortable. But they will take some deep shots, and they have speed at receiver. Quentin Johnston was on my freaks list. He is 6'4", 215, and he's explosive. I mean, he's every bit as athletic as Marvin Harrison Jr. He's really good. Darius Davis will be the fastest guy on the field in that game in the Fiesta Bowl. He's a slot guy who makes a ton of plays. And Kendre Miller is one of the best kept secrets in the country, a really good running back. I think Sonny Dykes has done a really, really good job. He took over for Gary Patterson. I think that program was really worn down, and that program needed a lot of energy. He brought it. He cut them loose a lot. And I think they play really hard and they have belief. We've seen them with some really amazing comebacks that they had because I think they all believe in each other, that somebody else next to them is going to come through, and they usually do. What I think is going to happen is the way they play defense, though, if you're patient and you're physical, I think you can wear them down and run right through them. And I actually think that's what Michigan's going to do. Other teams in the Big 12 kind of play into their hands because they can't stay patient. I think that's exactly what's in Michigan's DNA. I think it's a really bad matchup for TCU defense against the Michigan style.
That is my sense as well. I mean, we have seen Michigan just wear teams out in the second half, Bruce, and it does feel like You saw it against Ohio State. I mean, that's kind of been the blueprint here for the Wolverines, and TCU kind of a middle-of-the-road rushing defense nationally. So we'll see whether or not Michigan's able to kind of follow that blueprint. What about Ohio State? Obviously getting into the playoff, there's still been a lot of soul-searching here in Columbus. What can they do here in this immediate term to right the ship? I mean, it's a very different scenario than they thought they were going to be in 2.5 weeks ago, when the thought was, all right, we got a year now to figure out how to get this right. Now they got a few weeks. So what can they do to get back to the level where they feel like they can compete for the national championship?
You can erase all the doubts and skepticism, over the next month. If they go in and they punch Georgia in the mouth, and look, they have as many big dudes as Georgia. I don't know if Ohio State on the interior of the line, we know their two tackles are big pro prospects. Can the inside hold up against Jalen Carter at Georgia and some of the athletes, and they're big athletes that they're going to throw at them? I think I'm not doubting CJ Stroud. I think this is going to be a wild shootout, and I think you're going to I give Ohio State a puncher's chance and they got firepower. Just what shape is the running back room going to be in? That's what I wonder about, because, we know the guys have been banged up. Travion Henderson has not been the guy we saw last year. Mayan Williams is a factor, but he's been banged up. I look at defensively, they got gashed. And I think, Jim Knowles, that was his first real test, because he hasn't seen a lot of good quarterbacks. Ohio State, the reality was they just didn't see much. And then J.J. McCarthy, even without Blake Corum, he hit big shots. They used their tight ends. The tight end gave them problems. Well, now you're going to see a lot better tight ends. Brock Bowers is a huge weapon for them. They're bigger tight ends too. I think, what are we going to see from the Ohio State defense? They got embarrassed by Michigan at home. I think this is a wake-up call for that whole program. What have you got? Because it would not surprise me to see them go down the wire with Georgia. But the guys that showed up in Columbus against Michigan, that same effort shows up and that same mindset, they're going to get embarrassed by Georgia, because Georgia is every bit as physical as Michigan, and they're even bigger on defense. And I think that they could cause all sorts of problems for, really make them one-dimensional. So I'm excited to see what Ohio State shows up, because we know they got a lot of talent, but it's time for those guys to back up the recruiting hype and the big stats, because this is a big opportunity to shut a lot of people up.
I'm with you. I mean, it does feel like Georgia is constructed in much the same way that Michigan is. So to your point, either you can say that was a one-off and an aberration, we really are tough enough to go toe-to-toe with a team like that, or this can reinforce what happened in Columbus a couple weeks ago and then really put Ohio State into a spiral. Going to be fascinating to see how these two games come out. Bruce, as always, really appreciate your insights, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the Fiesta Bowl. Hoops from last night. Michigan State ended a 2-game skid, topped Penn State on the road by 9. Career high 23 from A.J. Hoggard. Zach Edey, 23 points, 18 boards as Purdue stayed perfect, topping Hofstra by 19. And Indiana got just the third ever triple-double in school history. Trace Jackson-Davis turns it in as they took down Nebraska 81-65. As promised, Rafael Davis is here. And Rafael, let's start with the Hoosiers. And I obviously want to talk about TJD, but in a weird sort of way, I almost feel like the bigger headline coming out of that game, even though history will remember TJD's performance, was how well the complementary players played.
Oh, yeah, it was a bounce-back game. You look at guys like Tamar Bates, Trey Galloway, they really struggled at Rutgers. 1 for 10, only 2 points. This was definitely a bounce-back game. They went out to New Jersey, got punched right in the mouth. Both of those guys played well. They ended up combining for 39 points. They make 9 3-pointers out of 14, so they really got the job done offensively. And when TJD, when he sees that double, he's going to have to get out of his hands, and the guys made shots. And even a guy like Miller Kopp stood out. Normally, Miller Kopp missed a few threes. It starts to look sad in the face sometimes. He kept it going to get 13 points. He got into his pull-up game, moved the ball well, and didn't necessarily have to make a lot of threes because those other guys stepped up.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about Miller Kopp a little bit on the postgame show, and I made exactly that same point. I mean, if he has a game where he's 1 of 5 from 3 historically, as he was in this game, he's not going to give you anything else.
Yep.
You're just totally done. The body language gets bad. That was not the case last night. He was great. And Mike Woodson was asked about it in the postgame and talked about how much he's worked on his game and being more than just a three-point shooter. Okay, but the biggest story as we look back on this game at the end of the year, what do you remember about this game? People are going to talk about Trayce Jackson-Davis. They brought him in to get those last couple of assists, but it really does show off how well-rounded his game is.
I mean, yeah, he gets a triple-double, but then he has 3 blocks, 3 steals, so he does it in an all-around facet. He really gets his teammates involved, and what I loved about last night, his teammates knew where he was as far as the assists, and they wanted to get him that triple-double, which means they have a good locker room. That locker room, they play for each other. When he got his 10th assist, all of those guys ran up to him, pushed him around, was excited for him, and they cheered him on. But he's going to have those games where he's double-teamed, triple-teamed. He may not have a high scoring number, but he can hit the glass, he can do other things, and now he's become a better passer, a willing passer, and when guys are making shots around him, Indiana's going to be tough to beat.
This was a big game in a lot of ways for them. I mean, I look at the fact they were coming off the loss to Rutgers, as you talked about, and the way in which they were beaten by Rutgers, how physical the Scarlet Knights were against them. But then you look at these next 2 games. I mean, they go to Las Vegas to take on Arizona, and then they travel to the Fog, where we know how hard it is to win, to take on Kansas. I mean, had they not played well in this game, all of a sudden you were looking at, I don't want to say a crisis, but a period where maybe you start questioning yourselves a little bit.
Yeah, and my college coach would always tell me, you normally start your next game how you finished your last one. And they were able to get a good finish to the game last night. It felt as though every time Nebraska got a little close, got pushed it to 7, cut it down the lead, IU made a run. They made some shots. They got the ball where it needed to be, and they weren't stagnant. And when you go and play against Arizona in that front line, they may not have to double as much as a Nebraska or a Rutgers, so they're going to play straight up, which is why it was so good to see Miller Kopp, Trey Galloway, Tamar Bates get some confidence, make some shots, because they're going to be leaned on in these games. They're going to have to play well. They're going to have to get some bench production, and they've got to find a way to get Xavier Johnson going. 7 turnovers in his last game, 6 in the prior one. He's going to be a catalyst to get them through those tough venues.
It's been an issue, and then Jalen Hood-Schifino was out as well for the second straight game with a back injury. I do want to touch on Nebraska. They were a really good story coming into this game. I mean, that win against Creighton was far and away the most impressive win of the Fred Hoiberg era, not just to beat a top 10 team, but to do it on the road, to do it in convincing fashion, really controlling the game throughout. It felt like this was an uphill battle for them, just given where Indiana was mentally coming off that game against Rutgers, and then you add in the absence of Sam Griesel, and it just kind of became a bridge too far.
Yeah, Indiana got punched in the mouth at Rutgers, so you know they would come out and play hard. Nebraska got down 20-5 at the beginning of the game, and it was just an uphill battle from there. And then without Sam Griesel, who's one of their better scorers, better guys in the paint to attack the rim, and also he's a great rebounder at his size and at his position. 12 rebounds against Creighton. He was really missed in this one. C.J. Wilcher had a good game, got 20 points. They're going to need that third scorer to go along with Griesel and Walker to keep this going.
And the reward now is Purdue. They go home to take on Purdue on Saturday. We'll talk about the Boilermakers in a minute. But in much the same way that Indiana needed a win last night, Michigan State really needed a win too. They had lost consecutive games to Notre Dame and Northwestern, both of whom are unranked. They have played such a difficult schedule, and we documented last night in the tip-off show. I mean, they've traveled 5,000 miles. They've played on an aircraft carrier. They've been out in Portland. They've been in Indy. They've been all over the place. But they needed a good performance here, and you add up how banged up they've been without Malik Hall in the lineup. And you go to Penn State, who's playing well, who has a really difficult style of play to defend with how many guys can hit the three. This was an impressive win against a Penn State team that had a charged-up crowd behind them.
It's a tough win, especially with these guys being a little tired, being winded on all those planes, traveling a lot. I really like how A.J. Hogarth stepped up and performed over the last 2 games. Although they lose against Northwestern, he comes off the bench. And I've been the guy that's been sent to the bench after being a starter, and it's a message from your head coach. And he's really responded. You look at the game last night, he took the game over. 23 points, 6 rebounds, and really got into the lane and made shots, made buckets, got other guys involved. And sometimes A.J. Hogarth can be a talker when they're up points, and he can be a front runner at times. But last night, up or down, he was going at Jalen Pickett. He really enjoyed that matchup. It could have been the 20 family members he had in attendance, but when A.J. Hogarth gets it going, it makes this Michigan State team a better team. They can move the ball. You have to guard them. Tyson Walker hits some big threes down the stretch. And then Joey Hauser, 15 big rebounds. Those three guys are going to be key for the rest of this season. They're going to have to perform every single game until Jay Nakins really gets his feet under him and Malik Hall gets back from injury.
Hauser, his third double-double of the year. What about Penn State? I mean, it really was a tale of two halves for them. They shot the ball so well in the first half from behind the arc, and this is kind of who they are, Raphael. I mean, they were leading the nation in made three-pointers per game coming in with 12. They hit 7 in the first half, so you're like, well, they're ahead of their pace. Only got 1 in the second half, and it felt like beyond that, really all they have offensively is just kind of Jalen Pickett backing guys down.
Yeah, and that's who Penn State is. They make shots in the first half, and the second they go cold, but they got good looks. Jalen Pickett was moving the ball around. Dre got some good looks. Funk didn't shoot the ball as well. Winter went down with some type of injury. He never really got his footing back after that. So they're going to have to make shots. They're going to have to build up Dorsey inside. You see Jalen Pickett talking to him throughout the game, especially when Jalen Pickett is in the post as a point guard. They send that double team. Dorsey's going to be open at the rim. You just got to go up there and finish. They need some sort of inside presence to be a safety release, a safety valve, so when those guys around the perimeter, if you have another second half like that, you have someone to go to.
Yeah, it is interesting to see this team without John Hara. And they were a perimeter-oriented team a year ago, but it's dramatically changed this year. I mean, to the point where they are as dependent on the three-point shot as any team in America.
Yeah, exactly.
That was not the case last year. They shot a lot of threes, but they didn't shoot an inordinate number of threes, and that's what we're seeing now. So that's the story with Michigan State and Penn State. What about Purdue? Still perfect. Again, you would expect to beat Hofstra, but got off to a really good start. And Zach Edey continues to dominate in ways that are just unfathomable.
Yeah, Purdue has Zach Edey and no one else does. He gets 23 points, 18 rebounds. And what was very impressive about that performance, he had 0 fouls. So to be a big guy, to attack the glass the way he does offensively and defensively, but to play without fouling, that's impressive. And also it's impressive by the referees and not giving any ticky-tack fouls. So that's going to be a key to this Purdue team, keep him out of foul trouble. But you're missing Mason Gillis, and what do you get from your 4 position with Caleb First and TKR, Trey Kaufman-Wren? They combine for 25 points. They get the job done there. It's just so many guys that Purdue has that can beat you. Fletcher Lawyer's been freshman of the week 2 weeks in a row. He's their best shooter. He shoots 1 for 5 from 3. Purdue still makes 10 threes.
Is this the best team in the Big Ten right now? Is Indiana? Is Illinois? Where would you go with that?
If I had to choose a team right now, I would go Purdue just because of their ability to score the ball inside when they need a bucket. They can run 4 or 5 different guys off of screens, and you have to respect it. So if you double, kick out 3, extra pass 3. If you keep it inside one-on-one, Zach Edey's going to dominate you. And this team has committed to playing hard. They committed to defending because all of these starters from this year were last year's backups.
Right.
When you're a backup, you learn to play hard. You learn how to empty your tank, and that's what this team is doing.
I like the way you put that. They have Zach Edey, and no one else does. I mentioned this last night. I think it bears repeating. Last 2 games, Zach Edey has collected 40 rebounds. Purdue's opponents have collected 41
That's crazy.
rebounds. He out-rebounded Minnesota by himself, and he was a little behind Hofstra last night. They took the foot off the gas. They put him on the bench.
Coach got him playing more minutes.
With that, we welcome in our hockey expert, Paul Caponigri. Let's start at the very top here, Cappy. The Big Ten, 3 of the top 6 in the national rankings. So these are not the computer rankings. These are the human rankings. Minnesota's 3rd, Penn State 5th, Michigan 6th.
Right.
How close do you believe those teams are to one another?
I mean, in hockey, they're all pretty close, but Minnesota right now is kind of head and shoulders, if you ask me. What they've done, they just went on a 6-game road trip to at Michigan, at Arizona State, and then back to East Lansing. So they're flying all over the country, and they won 5 out of 6, and their one loss was an overtime loss, which doesn't count as a full regulation loss in hockey. You kind of still get kind of credit for that. So they're just at the top of their game. If you ask Bob Motzko, their head coach right now, I think they wish it was March right now, the way they're playing. But things can change. They had a great run. We'll see. But I still like Ohio State too, and Notre Dame, and Penn State. It's so close. And Michigan State's been a surprise.
Yeah,
but they're playing well. They kind of had a roadblock last week. But It's so tight.
So I did mention the computer rankings, and we have the pairwise rankings.
It's December,
out,
Dave.
out this
It's time.
week. Yes,
It's time.
And so explain to people again. Give us the quick briefing for people who don't understand why these are important.
Right.
The polls don't matter. The pairwise rankings do matter. Minnesota's number one there. How are these used as we head towards the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, it's a computer system based on wins, losses, strength of schedule, road wins count a little more than home wins, all those things that, pretty simple ideas, but 16 make the tournament. There's at-larges after the first, 6 conference champions. So after that, there's about, 12 or 10 spots.
Yep.
Yes, math, number one. So you want to be in the top 12 for sure.
Yeah.
But you have that like 14, 15, you can maybe make it. Just depends on upsets in the tournament. So right now, when you look at this board, this is the big board. I think most teams are happy. I'd say the one team that, and we can get to this about it's all computers, is Michigan. Michigan's ranked, people think they're a top 5, 6 team. But in this, they're 10th because of their record, because partially they missed players. They played Minnesota without 5 or 6 guys, including their best player, and that doesn't get calculated into the computers. So that's where an argument comes, where you wish there was maybe a little human element to it for a team like that. But right now, the Big Ten is sitting really well.
And just to be clear, when they are filling out the bracket, there's no committee, so to speak, right? It's just we'll go down the pairwise and we slot it in.
Only committee would be to where they're going, where everyone's going, in which. But yeah, you're trying not to have Big Ten against Big Ten, conference against each other. But it's generally the computers that are doing all the work.
Let's get into some of the games. We have Michigan State, as we said, this weekend. Spartans got swept by Minnesota last weekend, but they've really been a good story here.
Yep.
So for people who maybe haven't followed to this point, how did Michigan State go from the bottom of the Big Ten, really for the last handful of years, to where they are this year, a really solid middle of the road to upper middle of the road team?
I mean, you could list a bunch of things. I think the two main, I'm going to go with Adam Nightingale, a new head coach, kind of infused a new style of play, a little more offensive-minded. And then they brought in Dylan St. Cyr, a veteran goalie, to kind of stabilize that position. They've had some young freshmen come. Of course, that's going to be a story when you have a team surprise. But those two things, I think, are the pillars right now. It'll be interesting to see against how they react after getting knocked down a little bit. I mean, Minnesota pretty much dominated all weekend. And, where's their confidence going to be? Because I think that's the fragility of that is they built it up, right? And then all of a sudden it gets knocked down. So how are they going to react this weekend? And then, with hockey, this is it for a lot of teams. They don't play until after Christmas. So you want to leave a good taste in your mouth in a big series like this.
So we're talking about a Michigan State team that's finished last in the Big Ten 5 of the last 6 years. We know how good Michigan has been, but this has been a really weird year for them. I mean,
they've had a weird 3 years, I feel like.
No doubt. A lot of tumult in the offseason. They have an interim head coach this year. As we've shown, they're still one of the elite teams in the country, but they're certainly not at the level they were a year ago. Right. Where is Michigan right now, kind of as a team on the ice, kind of mentally, the whole deal? Where do you think this group is?
I think they're just they're young, so they just almost maybe don't know any better in a lot of ways, which is a good thing. I just think it's a constant repeat of they're relying on top-end young players to come in right away and be their pillars. And when you do that, at times it can look unbelievably great, but at times it can struggle, or the inconsistencies of young inexperience can show. And then they've had illness. Adam Fantilli missed the series against Minnesota. That's where the computer system thing doesn't show. That could have changed things completely, missing some of your top players. I think, honestly, their coach would wish just try to win this series and get back after Christmas and conference play starts and just roll through that, hopefully stay healthy and just play and see what the results are.
Interesting. So really big series for them, really big series on both sides as you're outlining for somewhat different reasons. Penn State heads to Notre Dame. This feels like two teams headed a little bit in the opposite direction. Penn State has surprised people this year. Notre Dame maybe somewhat disappointing. What are you looking for in this series?
A response. I think Notre Dame has just been inconsistent, and they haven't found an MO for their season. They're usually a really good defensive team, rely on goaltending and will suffocate teams. And they've just been kind of up and down. They went out east, played two good teams, lost to BU 5-2, but then came back and beat Boston College. So you consider, oh, that's not a bad road trip. But if they continue to kind of go 500 all year, they're going to hover there around that 16, 17 spot in the pairwise and going to be a question mark for the tournament. So I think they need to put some wins together, and it's going to be tough. They're at home this weekend, which is good. And Penn State's got a nice, road test here. And these are so important because a lot of these teams now will not play until after Christmas or maybe into January. So this is kind of their last games for maybe 3 weeks. So you want to kind of put a good, taste in your mouth before the break.
Penn State really been a great story. Top 5 in the rankings for the first time in 4 years. You mentioned Notre Dame hovering right around that 500 mark. In fact, at 500 right now. They have not finished below 500 in 8 years. So Irish will have some work to do for sure after the holidays. How about Wisconsin and Minnesota? The Badgers have been down in recent years. This feels like a better team. I mean, they have, at their top end, have beaten some really good teams.
They have.
Minnesota is a really good team. What do you make of this pairing?
Boy, I think Friday's Wisconsin's big chance maybe to get a W because, like I said, Minnesota just came off of a 6-game road trip. They did really well. Maybe they have a little bit of a, kind of letdown at home. We'll see about that. I don't think they will. But Wisconsin is playing better. They beat Michigan on Friday at home. They played them. They were tied going into the third period Saturday. So they were right there to get a sweep against Michigan. So, they're almost hovering at 500, and they're the last team in the Big Ten. That's how good, I think, the big picture of how good this conference is now. I think when they drew it up 10 years ago, it's been 10 years now, Dave.
Wow.
This is kind of what they were hoping for is you don't really have a really weak link. When your worst team is 7-9,
yeah,
that's pretty good. And they've, like you said, they beat Minnesota Duluth twice. They beat Michigan. They're coming. They have young guys. Let's see what they do the second half. But there's no break in this Big Ten schedule. So the second half of the season is going to be crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when you have 7 wins on the year and 3 of them are against top 10 teams. So you mentioned off the top, you think Minnesota is a level above. What are you watching from the Gophers in this series against Wisconsin?
I just think, and you saw it last week, and like I said, I probably wish it was March right now, the way they're playing. They just have all the elements. They have veteran players. They have an experienced goalie now. Their defense is great. And then they have some young superstars. Jimmy Snuggerud and Logan Cooley are just phenomenal. So they just have a good mix of everything you could ask for. They have great leadership with Brock Faber. Like I said, I think, is there going to be a letdown Friday? First game at home in over a month. You are playing your big rival, which I think helps kind of maybe get the juices flowing there for them. But yeah, keep the ball rolling. I think Minnesota, the big thing for them the rest of the year is trying to make sure they're peaking in March to be ready for the tournament. Because all those guys came back this year to win a national championship. It wasn't a hidden secret. They're not scared to say that. That's what they came back for because that's what's been missing there.
Really been playing well. Last 6 games, they've scored 5 or more goals in 5 of those 6 games. Now they are clicking on all cylinders. Cappy, thanks as always for coming in. Looking forward to a really good weekend of hockey with plenty of coverage here on the network.